A good way to learn Bedlam is to start with a simple title in motion. Set the face color to anything darker than absolute white to help create a mask for the simulation to draw from. Find the Bedlam filter under Real Path. Play the project to begin the simulation. When adjusting Bedlam, it's useful to know the hotkey \. This gives an easy way to restart the simulation to quickly review your changes as you adjust the Bedlam controls. This is a real-time simulation. In other words, Bedlam calculates the physics for the fluid simulation in real time during playback. The simulation resets with any backward playhead movement. There are two sets of controls for Bedlam, the mask and simulation groups. The mask determines where the simulation will begin drawing based on the luminance values of the image. To see the mask, set the opacity to 100%. The threshold controls the overall strength or amount of the mask. Gamma adjusts the light and dark values of the image. Density fine-tunes the detail of the mask. Generally speaking, more detail produces a better result, and the crystallized slider breaks the mask into variations of this detail. The crystallized mask can be animated for even more detail variation during playback. A layer options pop-up provides various ways to set the order of where the simulation draws with the image. Mask only can be used for precise adjustments. Here you can see how the speed affects the mask. In front puts the simulation over the image. Matte cuts the mask to fit within the image alpha channel. Behind puts the simulation under the image. Experiment with different layer orders to become familiar with the results. Using simulation only is a good way to isolate the simulation from the image. Use this option to render the simulation layer as a QuickTime movie for more complex compositions that require additional blend modes, clones, or filters. Bedlam comes with a variety of simulation presets so you can quickly find a fluid style. You can also save your own library of fluid style presets. Bedlam playback in motion is usually fast enough to easily browse between style presets while the playhead is moving. Since all the simulation controls can be animated, the simulation will interpolate between presets as you browse. The simulation group contains the physics control for the simulation. Gravity sets whether the fluid draws upward or downward. Repel defines how much the fluid is pushed away from the mask in all directions. With repel set to 0, only the gravity value is at work. Smoke and fire life sets how long each color set draws before it dies. Some controls have extended ranges accessible through the numeric stepper tool. Drag controls the degree of resistance the fluid encounters during playback, and ultimately affects how fast or slow the simulation unfolds. This is a good parameter to animate with motion keyframes or behaviors for interesting results. Wind affects the left and right forces pushing the simulation. Another fun parameter to animate during playback. Turbulence sets the amount of chaos in the simulation. Turbulence speed affects how fast that chaos is set in motion. Bedlam can produce a fine, powdery-like simulation or a thick, liquid-like curling animation based on combinations of turbulence and turbulence speed. Viscosity changes the liquid thickness. Compare this to water, for instance, a low viscosity fluid, to honey, a thick and highly viscous liquid. Fluid density reacts to the surface tension of the simulation. Higher values cause the fluid boundaries to repel each other when they come into contact. In addition to the physics controls, this group also contains color wells and opacity settings for the smoke and fire colors. Let's move on to using Bedlam with shapes in motion. Once again, be sure to set the color to anything but pure white. With the rectangle selected, choose Bedlam under Real Path from the Filters list. I'll click Play. As you can see, nothing is happening. I'll drag the Bedlam filter to the group layer. Still no simulation during playback. The group layer has to be set to 3D for motion to work in this situation. Now any layers within this 3D group will apply to the Bedlam filter. Now let's add Bedlam to the video clip in motion. I want to draw the simulation from behind the actor in this scene, so first I'll need to create an alpha channel. I'll use the keyer filter to mask the green screen out. Change the group to 3D and add the Bedlam filter. I'm going to adjust the mask, so first set the opacity to 100. Try adjusting the gamma to draw the mask in the right areas. Click the simulation reset as needed to remove the simulation drawing. In this case, I'll change the mask method to dark areas. Now the mask is drawing evenly around the subject. Set the density down a bit for very fine detail. Now that I have the mask where I want it, I can change the mask opacity to 0. I'll use the Layer Options pop-up to set the simulation behind the subject. Now pick a preset. Finally, for quicker feedback, I'll choose half from the resolution pop-up. Not bad. I'm getting 9 frames per second real-time playback before rendering with this 1080 HD project using a 4K resolution video clip. As you can see, the alpha channel is intact. Since fluid simulation requires heavy GPU usage, it's always a good idea to render out your simulations as separate layers if you plan to build complex, multiple layered effects. If your project calls for multiple simulations, it's usually better to build your effects in motion and render to QuickTime before editing in Final Cut, so you can divide that heavy GPU work into several smaller tasks and eliminate that problem from the NLE. To use Bedlam in Final Cut Pro, there are a couple things about performance to keep in mind. Since an uninterrupted render is necessary, it's best to turn the background render checkbox off in the Preferences playback window. Set the View menu quality setting to Better Performance. Here, I've already imported a clip with an alpha channel built in. I can check this by choosing Alpha under the Channels in the View menu. Once the templates are installed, you can find the Bedlam effect in the Effect browser under Real Path. This is simply a motion Bedlam filter with all the inspector UI published to the template. Double-click to add it to the selected clip. I'll use the Loop Around Selected Clip hotkey a lot while making adjustments in Final Cut Pro, which is the / key. To speed up playback, I'll set my resolution to half. Next, I'll pick a preset. For this clip, I'll choose dark areas and set the simulation behind the subject. A little tweak with the density, and I'm ready to go. You will probably see skipping frames during regular playback, which is usually good enough feedback to tweak the controls. But a good trick to force playback of every frame is to hold the forward arrow key. Again, if you're planning a complex effect It's usually better to render out the simulations as separate QuickTime movies and load them back into the timeline to stand in for the Bedlam effect. Once installed, find the title templates in the title browser of the Final Cut Pro under RealPath Bedlam 2.0. There are a ton of styles to choose from, and they are divided into several categories. Like any title, drag or double-click the thumbnail to place it on the timeline. As with all the Bedlam simulations, you'll have to perform an uninterrupted render for full res smooth playback, but you should still get enough playback performance to make adjustments. Change the text in the inspector or directly on the viewer. Set the font, size, and other attributes just like any title. For position, the workflow is a bit different using these templates. In the Published Parameter tab, there are two sets of position controls, one for start and one for end. This will determine where the title starts and ends. Use the Position Z parameter to zoom a title up or down. The same applies to the rotation. There's a start and end group. The time it takes to interpolate between start and end is defined by the Move Speed parameter. Other controls are provided for when the title appears versus when the simulation draws, which makes for an unlimited set of combinations in a title sequence. Every title template also includes the full set of mask and simulation controls. Since there are so many templates in this package, you may never need to drill into the simulation controls, but they're there if you need them. The title templates work with both 3D and 2D text. Also note that each template contains an alpha channel, so you can layer the text effect over video or images. Of course, you can open any title template in Motion for the most controlled experience. Finally, let's look at generators that come with Bedlam 2.0. Like the titles, there are loads to choose from, and they are all divided neatly into various categories. Most generators in the Bedlam 2 collection are based on a motion particle emitter that travels along a Bezier stroke. Bedlam uses this emitter as a mask from which to draw the simulation. To adjust the position of the emitter stroke, first turn on Show Mask. Drag the Start, Middle, and End screen controls to where you want the stroke to draw. Next, click the Reset Particles button to reset for the new stroke shape. Turn Show Mask off at any time to start the simulation. Adjust the stroke speed to change the time it takes for the emitter to travel along the stroke. The birth rate controls how many particles emit along the stroke. Birth duration controls how long the emitter produces particles over the course of the stroke. Particle life sets how long the particles remain visible. Particle speed sets how fast the particles travel away from the emitter. Emission range sets the radius around the emitter where the particles will emit. A low value causes the particles to travel in a narrow path, and a high value, up to 360 degrees, will emit particles in all directions at once. When you're just starting out, experiment with all the emitter controls to get comfortable with their function before turning the Show Mask off. Once you're satisfied with the mask settings, you can turn the mask off and adjust the simulation controls as described earlier in this video. You'll find the same arrangement of simulation control in the generators and titles alike, with a few exceptions depending on the generator. Again, it's always a good idea to render your generators to a QuickTime movie to replace them in the timeline, especially if you're working with a lot of effects in a single project. Well, there's a quick summary of how to get started using Bedlam 2.0 in Motion and Final Cut Pro. Have fun and let it flow.